Well, that brings up an interesting point that crowdfunding is just one component of this larger fintech industry, and that
Mm,
there's creativity happening throughout. But I think it's interesting how you mention the institutional partners, because this is financial technology that is not disruption in the same way that we think about technology companies disrupting old models of production.
oh, I don't know. I think it's entirely disruptive. I think it's, uh,
Even
I
though
keep
it's
thinking,
reliant on relatively old distribution methods of capital.
I think it's totally transformation for real estate. So the distinction that I'm making when I think of it being transformational, and we're back to crowdfunding real estate, right? Not the creative uses, etc., particularly, but just the general premise of crowdfunding a real estate deal. The reason it's transformational is because now everybody can invest, and every developer can now advertise their deal online. It's transformational. It's changed the way it's done. I mean, it's just look. I think of the developers that I speak to, the seasoned developers who like to tell me, yeah, but we've already got our pool of investors who've been investing with us for years. Why do we need this? Well, you know why you need that? Because everybody else is now after your investors, right? So look, it might not be today and it might not be tomorrow, but in 6 months, by the end of next year, your investors are going to suddenly discover that you aren't the only game in town, and that they can now look on any number of websites and seek out any number of first-class sponsors that they can invest in exactly the same way as they've been investing with you. You need to up your game, right? You need to start changing things around. Yeah,
What?
so I think,
No, go ahead.
no, that's what I was just going to say. I mean, from that perspective, it's transformational. I don't think people really realize it yet. And that's the process of education. You need to know, because if not, you're going to be drowned by this tidal wave that's just going to sweep over you. You won't know what hit you.
Crowdfunding is being used as a way to mitigate the potential ill effects of
Mm,
a downturn. And I'm wondering what you think are
mm.
some of the other creative ways in which crowdfunding can be used, whether it is to stem, systemic losses from traditional means of default, or whatever else you observe out there where crowdfunding is being used in a way to come up with new types of products and new types of financial models that we're just starting to entertain.
Yeah, so some of the people that I've spoken to really have some very, I want to use some lofty ambitions. Ambition perhaps is the wrong word, but lofty vision of where this industry could go. At the extreme end, the idea is that um, crowdfunding debt, which is what you're talking about, crowdfunding debt could replace traditional channels, right? Banking channels. Uh, so you would, instead of, and the example that was discussed with me was that now you put your money on deposit at the bank and they pay you 0.01%. And then that money passes through multiple hands until eventually it reaches a developer who's out there building a property, and he gets charged 6-7%. And somewhere along the way, all the way through that, there's people taking a cut of that margin. And so why not just invest directly with the developer on the debt side, right? Why get 0.1 at the bank when you could get 4 or 5% directly with the developer? And the idea is that, or the idea that's been expressed to me is that once crowdfunding at its extreme, or at its maturity, will have replaced bank lending on the debt side. And I know that this is certainly something that you guys have taken a look at on a limited level, is to provide the entire capital stack to a developer, perhaps with some skin, at the very, very top on the developer side. So I think that has some very interesting possibilities, particularly. So I'm not sure if it's going to replace banking, right? So that's out. But I do think that there is a place for it, particularly on the local level, where you have the opportunity to invest in local businesses that might want to build their own facility or own their own property, right? So, that maybe they don't have the kind of track record that a bank will underwrite. Remember, banks are not doing it vindictively in any way. They're restricted by regulations as to how they underwrite risk, right? So if you don't fit their box, you're out of luck. But in those cases, you can go to the broader community and you can say, look, I've got a business that I want to run and I want to set it up, and it would be better for me if I was paying a mortgage than it would if I'm paying rent. So, would the community like to support me in that way? So I do think that there is a place for that. The institutional route in terms of financing is a lot easier, right? So instead of having to go out and collect small change from a bunch of investors, it's a lot easier if the numbers make sense and you can prove that it works to go to large institutional investors who just capitalize the whole deal for you.
It really depends on what the impetus is toward crowdfunding. If it's meant to be used as a community buy-in tool, then Reg CF is going to be that more compelling. I think it also depends on the market and the sub-market in which you're developing. In a market like Pittsburgh, let's say, or the south side of Chicago, if a bank is going to be involved in the deal and they want to see, let's say, 25% that the developer comes in with, 25% of a $4 million deal is $1 million. $1 million goes a long way in Pittsburgh or the south side of Chicago. $4 million goes a hell of a long way. So I think it's a matter of geography, really, and motivation when thinking about that cap. You're spot on, though, that right now it's just arbitrary because there are only 34 funding portals that are actually allowed to raise capital under Reg CF. Until there's some type of mass awareness of this vehicle, we're building it as it's, or rather, a better way to phrase this, we're driving it as it's being built.
And now you've got an entire class or an entire generation of potential investors who really don't know how to invest. So it's very, I think that a lot of developers don't realize how much they have to put into marketing and selling their deal online to raise any kind of money. And the problem, I think the biggest challenge for Reg CF is that the developer, and I'm learning this through you actually and through Small Change, is so dreadfully restricted in what they can actually do in terms of marketing. So the burden of reliance, I suppose, is on the platform, on the funding portal, to do the marketing and the heavy lifting. I've spoken to, as you know, I've spoken to a lot of the founders and CEOs of many of the major platforms. And one of the biggest issues that everybody faces is one of education on two levels. One is just that you can do this now, right? Like yesterday you couldn't, now you can. So once you get past that hurdle, the next is, okay, great. Now I can invest in real estate like, the moguls of real estate in America, the ultra wealthy of America, have been investing. But how do I do that? How can I tell what's a good deal from a bad deal? What are all these, terms of art that are used? A cap rate, IRR, LTC, LTV. There's just this whole catalog of concepts now that people have to understand in order to be an informed investor. And so I think that a lot of the websites do a good job of that. But in my view, there is no doubt that they are hampered by their own exalted levels of understanding and experience in the industry, and don't really realize how little, that's not really right, but how advanced their dialogue is when they're trying to explain these concepts to somebody who really has no experience of it at all. And this is actually something that you guys have done at Small Change that inspires me and has caused me to really think hard about the way that I articulate these questions. And that is, or how I articulate these answers. And that is the use of plain English.
Yeah.
Right? Well, I remember reading your documentation and being absolutely blown away, thinking, how did you do this? I've never read anything as perfectly well worded, as clearly worded that anyone can understand it.